up, everybody? Welcome back. It is windy today. Holy jeez. I just got back from my walk toward Ellen for the day, and I was standing on my front porch, and I kind of wanted to yell Auntie M really loud, and I probably may have ducked once or twice because I was sure there were flying monkeys, but none of that happened. But then I just decided to go inside and be quiet because I'm pretty sure my neighbors think I'm crazy as it is. So, I decided that we should cuddle here on the couch, and I'm going to tell you a little story. And just a forewarning, you're probably going to question the validity of said story, and you're probably going to wonder if I'm making any of it up or want to check your facts, but if that's even possible with this. But I promise, attest, you have my word that everything I'm telling you actually happened. So here we go. We're not playing two truths and a lie, or I'm not going to go at the end, just kidding. Okay, so here we go. So as some of you know, I am adopted. I was adopted at the ripe age of 3 days old. My birth mother was younger, in her late teens, and decided that it would be better if I had a mom and a dad. So she gave birth to me here in Bountiful where I live, and then she left the hospital the next day, and I was in the hospital for 2 more days, and then I was placed with my family on the 3rd day. So my adoption was a closed adoption. The records were sealed tight. Everything was to be private, kept confidential, and we would go about our lives. And I'd always kind of wondered, I'd always wondered who she was, had thought about her, made, this image of her in my mind. When I was little, I used to dream think all the time, maybe she was the Queen of England, and I was actually a princess by blood. Or maybe she was a poor woman okay, so this is kind of dumb. I didn't, when I was young, like 5 or 6, because I always knew I was adopted. There was never a time where I didn't. I saw this copy of National Geographic, and it had some third world, country in Africa somewhere with these poor villagers and everything, and I found myself wondering if maybe one of them was my mom, but these villagers had brown skin. I do not, but it never clicked. And also one time, in 3rd grade, my brother and sister convinced me that the movie The Little Mermaid was actually a story of my life. So that I had previously been a mermaid, and that Mom and Dad really wanted me, and and King Triton didn't want that many kids, and so he put a spell on me and changed me back to a person. Yeah, I believed that for a few weeks. So I had always wondered about her. And then when I was in high school, I looked, my last year of high school, I looked for a little bit, but by way of and this was back before internet or, Facebook and all of that stuff. I had looked for her by looking on the state registry for a couple of things, but never, just came up with dead ends. And so, kind of just didn't really worry about it. And then when I was 20 years old, no, I was like 18 or 19. So it was right after I graduated from high school. My brother and sister, who are also adopted, they're not my biological brother and sister. They're my adopted brother and sister. And they're not biologically related either. They were both adopted, and they both found their birth moms. And their adoptions had gone through LDS Family Services, and so they were easy to connect the dots, and they had found their birth moms and blah, 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 and I found myself getting really jealous and was having a hard time with it, but my parents helped me look a little bit, but we were just coming up with dead ends because the records were sealed. And then when I was 20, I met with the lawyer who had, sorry, my arm is itching, the lawyer who had done my parents' side of the adoption, and talked with him a little bit, and he said, he didn't remember very much, but the records were indeed sealed, but he gave me like a few little details about my birth mom. Well, come to find out, a couple months later, he actually went to prison for fraud. So I just kind of, he lost all of his validity. I think that's the word. Anyway, so I finally just gave up. I just decided, you know what? I'm not going to find her. She obviously is not meant to be found, doesn't want to be found. I'm just going to go on with my life. And I did. So come 2003, 2004, early 2004, my mother, my adoptive mother, the mother that is my mom, that I grew up with, raised me, all that fun stuff, she went on a vacation to Portland to visit some family. And I was living in southern Utah at the time, going to school. And she had gone to Portland, had her vacation, was getting ready to come home, and she was flying standby. She was flying on a buddy pass, and she didn't get on. And so she went and sat down to wait for the next flight. Well, she sat down next to this woman, and my mom is much like myself, and she talks to everybody and anybody. And she struck up a conversation with this lady that she's sitting next to. And they start talking. Excuse me, my eye is watering. Ugh, eye issue. They started talking, and they found out that they were both from Utah. She was from a little bit further north than here, and from here. And I get so nervous talking. I don't even know why. It's me! Anyway, so they started talking and discovered they both lived in Utah, and then they started talking about genealogy and how they both loved doing genealogy, and then they discovered that they had relatives from the same area in Europe, and blah, 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 and just were having a grand old conversation. And about an hour into the conversation, they get on the topic of adoption, and this woman says to my mother, well, I have a stepdaughter that gave a baby up for adoption in Bountiful. And my mother says, oh, well, I know, not wanting to divulge too much about herself, she said, I know, as if she hadn't already, I know some people who have adopted some children. And she was like, oh. And so this woman started to tell my mother the story of when her stepdaughter gave the baby up for adoption. So my adoption story of when my birth mom got pregnant with me, some things that happened during her pregnancy, leading up until when I was born, mine is very different than very out of the ordinary. There's a lot of factors to it that aren't things that are just random, that are coincidental with other people's, if that makes sense. And maybe one day I'll get into them, and maybe one day I won't. It just depends on, I have to protect people's privacy. So anyway, so this woman starts talking to my mother and telling her my adoption story. And my mom is thinking in her head, she tells me later, she's thinking in her head, oh my gosh, that's Melissa's birth mom. But she doesn't say anything to this woman because, one, she wasn't 100% sure, and two, she had decided, because she's brilliant, that it was my decision as to whether or not I wanted to pursue this or what. So they finished the conversation. She asks what year it happened, and she said the year that I was born, and in the springtime, and my birthday's in May. And my mom was just absolutely speechless. So they continued talking. They were there for a few hours and decided that when they got back to Utah, they wanted to do some genealogy together and, just be friends. So they exchanged information, and this woman got on a flight before my mom did and left. And then my mom came home. But what's funny is that before she left the airport, she called my dad and said, keep this name and number because I think we found Melissa's birth mom. So fast forward a little bit, a couple months later, about a month later, they came down to southern Utah where I was, and my parents, and said, hey, we think we have found your birth mom, and they told me the story, and I couldn't even I couldn't even wrap my head around it. I was just blown away. I just couldn't put it together that she had met this woman who was potentially the stepmother to my birth mom in Oregon. It was crazy. So I was about a month away from finals for school, and I was going away for a conference for a club I belonged to and all this stuff, and I said, I don't want to deal with this right now. Give me a couple months. When I come home for the summer, we'll talk about it. So I just kind of put it in the back of my head because, one, I didn't believe it was real. And then two, I was trying to focus on what I was doing. So I just I pushed it out of my head and went about my life. So June comes along, and June of 2004, and I come home, and I get settled, and I thought about it for a couple weeks, and I finally approached my mom, and I said, okay, let's do this. And she said, all right. And so she still had not told this woman, whose name okay, so let's call her Mary. Let's call this woman that my mom met at the airport Mary, so that we can keep straight here. So my mom had met with Mary a couple of times to do some genealogy and go to lunch and stuff, but hadn't said anything to her yet. Mary didn't even know that my mom had adopted children, that her children were adopted. So what we did is my mom made a date, I guess, to go up to Mary's house and work on some genealogy. And she said, and then I said, well, why don't I come up a little bit later and pretend like I need to get something out of your car, and then I'll fill in the gaps. And so she went up there. She was up there for a little bit. I go up there, and I ring the doorbell, and my mom answers, and she brings me in, and she takes me down into Mary's office, and she's like, Mary, my daughter's here. And Mary turns around, and you would have thought that she had seen a ghost. Like, the expression on her face was priceless. And it took her a good 30 seconds to get anything out. And she looks at my mom and she says, this is your daughter? And my mom says, yes. And she looks at me and she says, how old are you? And I tell her, and she says, oh my gosh. And I was kind of like trying not to smile. And she said, you're her daughter. You're my stepdaughter's daughter. And I smiled and I said, I think so. We think so. And she said, well, it's pretty obvious. And she takes me over and shows me a picture on the wall. And I lay eyes on my birth mother for the first time. And you guys, it was just like looking in the mirror. She looks exactly like me. And I was stunned. Like, I couldn't, it just happened. Like, oh my gosh, there's my birth mom. And so we all, of course, started crying, and she hugs me, and she holds my face, and she says, she said a couple of things, and it still shocks me. Even to this day, it's been like 10 plus years, and I'm just blown away. So we kind of confirmed dates, and, of course it was obvious, but we just kind of confirmed dates and everything, and yeah, we made the connection. So then I said, where does she live? And she says, okay, so now we'll call my birth mom to protect her privacy. And those of you who do know me personally and know her name, please don't put it in the comments. Anyway, we will call my birth mom Bonnie. How about that? So I ask her, I say, where does Bonnie live? And she says she lives, I can tell you this. She says she lives in California. And I said, okay. And I kind of I didn't want to because I didn't want to make Mary feel bad, but at that point I wasn't really interested in anything Mary had to say. I just wanted to know about Bonnie. And so she says, well, let me try to call her. So she calls her, and she's not home. So she leaves her a message on the answering machine. So at this point, I'm just anxious and shaking, and just all I want to do is you know, find out all I can about Bonnie. I just couldn't believe that, oh my gosh, you know, like, looking at Mary, like, you know who my birth mom is, and you just called her on the phone, and, oh my gosh, why isn't she home? Why isn't she home at a time like this? Who leaves their house? So, it was, yeah. So, we sit down and we visit for a little bit, and Mary shows me some photo albums and some pictures of Bonnie and answers a couple questions, and finally, probably about 15 minutes later, her phone rings, and it's Bonnie, and Mary just says hello, and then she says, she doesn't even explain anything to her. She just says, I have somebody here who wants to talk to you, and she hands me the phone, and I almost threw up all over it. I didn't know what to say, like, yeah, so I just got on the phone, and I said, hi, did you give a baby up for adoption on this day and this year in Bountiful, Utah? And she said, yes, I did. And I said, well, that baby's me. And that's where I'm going to leave the story for now. Thank you so much for joining me. I feel like it's Masterpiece Theater. Thank you for joining us this evening on Masterpiece Theater. Except for this is actually a true story. If you haven't already, will you please subscribe to my channel? I'd really appreciate it. And hit the like button for these awesome eyebrows I'm rocking today. I think that the eyebrow pencil might have been a tad bit too dark. But we're learning. Have a great afternoon and evening and morning tomorrow. I'll be coming back at you on Thursday with a little update on my walk to Ellen, some fun weight loss tips, and let's talk about eating a donut out of the trash. As always, enjoy the day. Bet you wish you had eye issues like me. Bet you wish your eye was as watery as me.